How was your day?
It was great. How was your day, Ms. Barnes?
Today has been good considering we had a lot of people out in terms of support, but we made it through. So we're here, and thank you for staying after school to do this. I know that this is a little different than how we've been doing things. In the second quarter, I'm going to I'm going to do more one-on-ones with some teachers, and I'm going to make you more of my priority. And the reason why I'm doing this is because Miss White is a veteran, Ms. Booth is a veteran, but you come from a non-traditional background, and so I want to spend some time doing some unpacking with you of our standards so that you'll have a really great understanding of them, okay?
That sounds good.
I do want to give you some glows. Today when we had our data session and we were sitting back talking about the Common Form and Assessment that we took back in September before intercession, you had some really decent things going on with your data. I saw in some areas where students answered questions correctly in high percentages. So just talk to me real briefly about the areas that you feel like they're doing well in as a whole.
As a whole, I think they're doing well with grasping new concepts and holding on to that information and applying it later on down the line, whether it's a formal assessment or another assignment that is similar.
Okay.
I also feel like they're doing a good job with picking up on the trends and habits in our classrooms. One day I had to step out for another meeting, and students were reading along with a teaching assistant, and they were making their gist notes without the teacher assistant prompting them to do that. So they're picking up on habits that help them analyze and synthesize information in our literature. So they're picking up on some good habits.
Great. So it seems like you set some procedures in motion that they're learning, like you said, and they know how to do them without you having to tell them.
Independently. Yep.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to come and check out the GIST activity.
Okay.
So I took a look at your 6-week plan that we developed on that Thursday before we went home for intercession. And I noticed that only 11% of your scholars were at mastery for reading R2. This standard is determining central ideas or themes of a text and analyzing their development, in addition to summarizing the key supporting details and ideas. So just to that was a lengthy piece. So the biggest piece here is determining central ideas and themes, the development of a story, and then summarizing. And again, that's R.2, reading 2.
What was the last portion? Summary?
Yes, summarizing. So it's a lot embedded into that standard, okay? And there were quite a few questions on that assessment from that goal. So it's going to be really important moving forward that they do better.
Yes.
With 11% of them being at mastery there. So talk to me a little bit about why you think this standard that we just discussed was challenging for 89% of your scholars.
I don't think it's something we practice in the classroom on a daily basis. So even though they may have been exposed to that skill before, it's not something they have been practicing prior to our assessment, our CFA.
Okay. So when you say something not practiced, you have not done it in what way?
We haven't done it in the same way that it was presented in their CFA.
Okay.
So although they have been thinking about central ideas and themes, it wasn't in the same format as their test.
Okay.
And so we need to practice that.
That's a good observation. So you talked a little bit about that, and I took note of that because that's good for me to know and trying to help you. What I would like to do today is have us both look at an excerpt from the CFA. Then we're only going to look at one question for the sake of off from my video. Okay. So we'll go back. So what I was saying before we got cut off was that we were talking about how it was challenging for 89% of your scholars. So today we're going to look at an excerpt from the CFA. We're going to just analyze one question for the sake of time based on that standard. And the biggest piece in this, we're going to try to find the gap in scholars answering it incorrectly. So let's focus on why they answered it wrong versus why they answered it right, if that makes sense.
It does.
Okay, let's do it. So I've already printed out a copy. That's yours. Here's mine, so we can move our technology out of the way. If you're anything like me, you're good at skimming and scanning.
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to skim and scan this, and the excerpt came from The Great Fire by Jim Murphy. It's a Lexile Level 1000. So,
Miss Jones or Miss Bailey, if you're in the building, may you please report?
for a few minutes. Let's take about 2 minutes to do that. All right, don't turn over yet because the correct answer is there. Okay, now let's look at the question. The question says, which statement below best summarizes the central idea of this passage? Again, we're dealing with the key word here, summarize.
Okay.
And it also goes to another thing that we talked about in that standard. What are you seeing here?
Central idea.
There we go. Okay. So it's really asking scholars to look for two things, or do two things: summarize and look for a central idea. Okay. So let's look at these answer choices. Before we get the correct answer, what do you think the correct answer is and why?
Well, I think it was the D, because they spoke a lot about how structures were made out of wood and the sidewalks were made out of wood, and how and so that fit with the response for D.
Okay, you are correct. The correct answer is D. We can flip over here. So let's look at this. 13.47% of your scholars answered this correctly. Okay, so out of all of that, that was pretty much, no, that was the second lowest. 13.9 of them said C. 15.75 of them said B. But this is what really got me.
Yeah, most of them.
The most common error made was them answering A at 55.41%.
Yes.
So, now that we know what the most common error was, which is A, 55.41%, why do you think this was commonly selected as an answer? And it may take us a little time because we're analyzing it. So we scanned the excerpt. We have 4 answer choices. It asked them to summarize and central idea. So they chose A, and A says the Great Fire of Chicago was one of the most damaging fires in American history. You know your babies well better than I do, much better than I do. You're with them every day. Why do you think A was their most selected answer?
Well, first of all, I think they were all moving quickly through the test. So they were moving faster than they should have. And so they may not have read through and analyzed the similarities and differences of their options, because there are similarities with option A and option D.
Let me look at those. A. Okay. But what's the biggest difference between A and D? Again, A says the Great Fire of Chicago was one of the most damaging fires in American history. D says Chicago provided almost perfect conditions for a widespread and damaging fire. So it looks like, I'm gonna let you talk about it.
What was the question you asked me?
Yeah, like what's the biggest difference you see between A and D?
A is just a blanket. It was one of the most damaging fires in American history.
Okay.
And D is talking about Chicago specifically providing perfect conditions for a damaging fire.
In the excerpt, what was the excerpt mostly about? Was it mostly about the damaging fire of the century or in history? Or was it about the conditions or things that made it?
B, it was about the conditions.
Mm-hmm.
And so they focused on just the effect of the fire more so than what was being described in the excerpt, because they didn't pay attention to the details in the excerpt.
People always say it's all in the details, right?
Absolutely.
And so now that we know that there was a deficit with them and the details, just think about how that could look differently in your instruction and how powerful it would be if you had the test in hand and you went back over. How would you just explain this to them? If you wanted to explain to your scholars that 55.41% of you chose A when the correct answer is actually D, like how could you get them to understand the difference between the two?
Similar to the conversation that we're having, and I will remind them, and this is not what we're talking about right now, but then another difference, or they've been used to being able to annotate with pencil and paper.
Okay.
So with them taking the test online, they were not able to underline and highlight and bring out some of these details that may have assisted them in seeing the differences and the details that would have helped them differentiate between A and D. So
that's really key, because if that's something a skill you've been working on highlighting and annotating, and then you're using this, and you can do it up here, but they may not know how to do it.
And that's what I was just thinking. Maybe that's something we need to practice. I know we're going to be trying to use more informational text in the classroom, and so when I do implement that next week, I'm going to have to teach them how to highlight on the computer.
Okay.
So they need to be able to annotate on the computer.
Yeah. So I think that's very key. Moving forward, you and I are going to work on your 6-week plan, and it's going to be based on this standard for next week, because I want a really quick turnaround.
Yes.
We're already, as I was saying before the video went out, it's going to be really important that, because this is a standard that had so many questions on the test, that they really get a great understanding of it. So again, we're going to, moving forward, we're working more closely together. We're going to work on a 6-week plan. So right now we're going to do one activity based around this standard. So we're going to open the 6-week plan, and I've already pulled that up for you. And we're going to go to the first week of the planning. And based on that standard, and the good thing about it, we can pull up different websites like Common Core and all that while you're doing it. We're just going to plan for Monday.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to do one activity for Monday based around R2. All right,
Yes.
ready?
I'm ready.
Let's do this.
Let's do it.
Okay.